and start recording so that way anybody that doesn't make it can jump right in. And let me share this. All right. Okay, so let's get out of that. Okay, so I wanted to take a quick look at just a couple of the assignments that one that we went over, and then we're going to look at the following week. So I wanted to, and when you submitted your assignment for last week, I attached a document to it and kind of an example of a supplemental report. Can everybody see that? Or can anybody just give me a thumbs up or something that, okay, good. All right. So remember just a few things that when we write our supplementals or when we write almost any report, stick with the headings. You really can't go wrong with putting the headings in there. You can change the name of the headings a little bit, but it really does make it easier. And then also keep in mind that you don't have to do the numbering on the side. The numbering is not like a heading, so you don't need to put number 1 notification and then number 2, like in this example, number 2 investigation, number 3. It's not a numbering of the heading. Remember, in that template, it's just to keep track of the lines. So that's really all it is. So you can, if you use a Word doc like I'm using right here, and we're looking back at the previous week's example, our notification. So remember the day, on Sunday. So this is kind of an example, February 20th at 12:30. My partner, Detective Jones, and I always like to say who I am. If you don't, and you just say I, that's okay, but it is better for the reader. And here we conducted a follow-up regarding an armed robbery that occurred at the 7-Eleven market, and I gave the address. And then I kind of go on to say here the original report was completed by Officer Parcher on this date at this time, and I referenced the case number because that's how this report's going to get attached to the main report. So that's my notification. There's not a lot of hoopla to it. It's pretty straightforward, but it's factual, dates, times, etc. And then I go into the investigation and I added a little thing, and you could do this too. Here it's a photo lineup because that's really why I'm going there. So I, instead of just investigation, and you could be fine with just that, but I add the photo lineup so the reader knows, hey, this is kind of what I'm doing. So I don't go into a lot of the backstory on what happened because realistically the report's already taken, right? So I don't have to go into all the detail and rehash the report. So here I'm contacting the victim and I say who it is. I let her know that I was going to show her some photographs, and then I kind of say a photographic lineup. And then prior to doing the lineup, I read the victim here, Smith, the photographic lineup admonishment, and I put C attached, meaning that I would attach that little document that we looked over last week. Remember, there was that admonishment form. Now, you don't have to do that as quite as detailed, but that's about as detailed as it gets. And then I go on to say that I told this victim here that the person may or may not be among the photographs, and I instructed her to take her time, and if she were to recognize anyone, to point them out. And then I showed the victim the lineup, and the lineup contained 6 photographs, numbered 1 through 6. So super factual. Anybody that reads this really knows what I'm doing. I'm not adding a lot of kind of superfluous things about what happened before because we already know that. That report is already done. I'm just prepping the investigation. And then what the victim tells me, I put under a statement. Now, you probably could put it under investigation photo lineup too, but I just separated it out so the reader knows, hey, here's the prep work I did, and now here's what the victim is going to tell me. So the victim viewed the photographs for about 7 to 10 seconds, and that's important because when somebody makes an ID, if it takes them 5 or 6 minutes, that means that they're really not sure. They're really thinking through, and maybe they're trying to compare instead of really just recognizing the suspect here. So I put in here I showed the victim the lineup for about 7 to 10 seconds, and she immediately pointed to photograph number 3. And then here's what she said, and I quoted it because it's important, because it kind of heightens the importance, right? So I say that, Smith then said, quote, "I recognize him. He's the one that put the gun to my head and slapped me." And then she also said, "I remember him. That's him." And then I don't go on to just kind of drone on about everything that she said, but I put these quotes in there. And then I identify who photograph 3 was. I don't go into their previous history, etc. I just say photograph number 3 was identified as this person with that date of birth. And then as evidence, the victim made a positive ID on this person, and the photographic lineup is going to be booked as evidence under a property tag number. I just made one up, 202. And then my disposition, or my recommendation, meaning what's going to happen after I'm done with all this, we're going to attach this to the original crime report, and we're going to forward it to the DA for issuance of a warrant for robbery against this person. And again, you don't have to know all the little ins and outs about forwarding to the DA and stuff like that, but use this kind of as a baseline. But again, note that I use the headings, even though it's just really super short, but it really is pretty factual. There's not a lot left for the reader to kind of figure out. So I'm hoping this kind of helps you a little bit as we move into our next supplemental, which is going to be the week after. And I wanted to, let's see if I know where it is. Let me see if I can find it here. There we go. So not this week, but the following week, you're going to have the same thing, and we'll have a lecture, of course, next Tuesday, so we'll go over this, but I kind of wanted to give you a head start to think about it, okay? And basically what it's going to be, and I always tell you what it is, right? It's going to be a supplemental report. You don't have to do the face pages because you're just going to do this little report. And the premise here is that a detective is going to call a suspect that they believe is involved in stealing money and talk to her regarding some allegations that she stole some money from her employer. And in the video, you'll see that the person initially denies it, but then she confesses after the detective tells her that there were video cameras recording her taking the money. And then after the call, the detective tells his partner, who was there listening to the call, that the video cameras really don't exist, and that he kind of tricked her into making that statement. So, whether you think that's lawful or not, write it as it kind of happens. And again, use the headings, okay? And you only really have to quote those real important things that somebody tells you, okay? And I gave you some different, because this is kind of an embezzlement case, I basically gave you burglary, grand theft, and embezzlement, so you could look at the sections, because it is important that you know what the elements of the crime are if you're going to prove that particular case, if that makes sense. And I'm hoping that it does. So that's just kind of a sneak peek on the following week. Let me see, I've got someone in the chat here. Why would detectives, law enforcement, or investigators do that? Okay, so first let me ask, I'll just kind of throw this out here before we get into our lecture. Can law enforcement not tell the truth to someone? Can they have a ruse or a little bit of a trick? So I see some head shaking, a couple thumbs up, and the answer is yes. Now, we can't plant evidence, okay, and things like that, but we can kind of walk that fine line, and if we initially tell the person, hey, there were cameras, and they admit to it, then we can use that statement. But remember, we have to have some corroborating evidence to kind of go with it as well. So just understand that. But we are allowed to use a little bit of trickery, if you will, to get somebody to confess. But again, we're going to have to prove, even though we've got that statement, we still have to prove all of the elements of the crime. So, and law enforcement doesn't do it a lot, but they can use and they do use a little bit of trickery here and there. So to kind of give you a quick sneak peek, I have a student in a previous class that did the same supplemental report to give you kind of a quick look. And again, she used headings here. She put supplemental report to the case number, and you can make up a case number. And she also added this thing right here, which you don't have to do, audio recorded telephone call, evidence, etc. But she uses the headings. Okay, so the details, all right, it could be notification. And it talks about the owner of the yogurt store that called saying that somebody was possibly taking money, etc. And then it goes into the investigation where, and here, instead of maybe investigation photo lineup, it could be investigation phone contact or, possible suspect contact, however you want to write that. But here the detective calls the person on a recorded telephone line, and it's always good to say that it's recorded. And he basically asks the person a couple of questions, and she admits and says that she wants to pay the money back, etc. And then the student has a recommendation. Now, here you don't really have to explain the crime. She threw this in there, so it is kind of a little bit different, but I wanted to show you how this individual wrote the report. If you used the same headings that you used in last week's, you're going to be fine. There's a notification. There's going to be, or details, whichever way you want to start. There's going to be an investigation. There's going to be a statement from a possible suspect, right? And then there's going to be, if there's some evidence, which could be the recording of the call, and then there's going to be a disposition or recommendation. Stick with those headings, okay? Don't veer off too far, and you only really need to put in some of the factual things in there, okay? So I hope this kind of helps, gives you a little bit of kind of a pre-look into next week's assignment. So I'm hoping that kind of helps everybody out just a little bit. All right, so let me see if I can escape out of this. All right. And now we're going to go to tonight. So any questions before we kind of move forward, any questions on last week's writing assignment and kind of the preview into the following week? So remember, this week there is no writing assignment because you have kind of a culmination of of chapter exam. So anything before I kind of jump into the lecture? All right.
Well, did that officer that wrote the report, this officer, did he ever get fired for his shoddy work?
Are you talking? Is that the kind of made-up report? The one that you had to look at?
Yeah, that was the discussion report that we had to go through and nitpick it and point out all the errors in it.
Yeah, I made that up. So that wasn't an actual police report, just so you know. I kind of sat with a friend of mine and put together the most horrible report you've ever seen. And well, yeah, it was bad, but I really, I mean, and we had to work pretty hard to get it, but I wanted you to see. I've seen reports that actually look like that. So I'm going to start off, even though we kind of made that up. And you can see that there were just so many things in there. A lot of you didn't even have you probably started reading it, and if you were like me, I started to like sweat because it was stressing me out so much. Because there were so many little things that were just bad with it. Even if they would have broken it up into headings, it would have been better, right? I mean, but it was like one large brick of text. And the point that we were trying to get across on that is that there are reports that are, I mean, so bad that they're just difficult to read. When you looked at that, you probably, I don't know what you thought, I guess, when you looked at it. Some of you gave me great explanations on it. And But yeah, just looking at that, when we were done with it, I go, anyone that looks at this is going to get like, they're going to stress out because you can't even tell where things start or end, or yeah, it was just bad. So,
The only way you could tell is it said end of report.
say that again.
So the only way you could tell is it said end of report, and
Yeah,
even then,
yeah, and I mean, and it was bad. But I mean, if the author of the report would have broken it up into headings and maybe proofread it a few times and taken some of the little tips that we've kind of looked at, we could have made it into something that would have at least been sort of acceptable. So yeah, that was just kind of I hope, a learning lesson for all of you. But again, I've seen some pretty awful reports, and um, that's not where we want to go. We want to be concise, but have enough information and be factual, and make it easy on the reader. So with that said, tonight's chapter, we're going to cover some basics of grammar and things. And yeah, I know everybody kind of has their own style of writing and this and that, but remember, this is more kind of police writing, so it's a little bit different. So you have to find that kind of happy medium in there. So by way of introduction, what we want to do is we do want to understand the importance of using proper English grammar skills when we write these reports. We want to understand some of the basics, and kind of get ourselves out of some of the words that we tend to mess up, um, or don't spell well, or we use too many commas, or what have you. You want to take a look at your own writing style, and kind of apply that. And again, some of you kind of have your own way of writing, and that's fine. Use what's comfortable for you, but try to apply some of the things that we've learned over the last several weeks. So I guess kind of what I'm saying is that if we've been talking about using headings for 4 weeks now, you should use headings. Otherwise, we wouldn't keep bringing it up every single time. So use those headings, okay? Part of this report, it's really essential that you can express what you see clearly and correctly, in your narrative report, and you're writing a supplemental, and that's kind of a narrative, right? So keep it simple, but keep it factual. Because again, you have to be able to convey exactly what happened with no, you know, misconceptions, misinterpretations, etc. And a lot of times when we write, we're not concise or precise enough, and therefore we tend to mix things up, and people get the wrong idea when we say something. So an important thing for us to remember, especially when we write these narratives, is that a fact is a statement that you can prove. These are facts. Okay. So I'll give you kind of a little example that I always do in some of my writing class. A fact would be something like, I saw that the man had a bulge in his pocket, or the man had a bulge in his pocket. That's a fact. So I remember when I was younger and I worked at a liquor store, and every once in a while this liquor store would get robbed. And I remember seeing somebody coming in, and I use this analogy because I remember a guy that came in and he had this big bulge in his pocket. And he was wearing a big jacket, and it was like 88 degrees outside. So I kind of knew something was up anyway. But the fact is, if we're going to kind of break these apart, the man had a bulge in his pocket. So the inference that we draw from this, from the facts, because that's how we get an inference, is that, hey, maybe he's carrying a gun. So can you guys see the difference between a fact and an inference? You draw an inference from the facts, if that kind of makes sense. Okay. And then your opinion is just kind of like what you think. Like, hey, the man's jacket's cool, which really doesn't really mean anything in this thing, but people draw inferences from facts, and facts are things that can actually be proven. And here's a great photo to kind of show that. So when you look at this picture, you kind of see the fox who killed the chicken, or did he? So what do you think? Do you think that
I see feathers in that fox's mouth, so I can determine that he probably had something to do with that chicken's death.
okay? But you can't really say that he killed him, right? Maybe?
Correct. I can't say that he's the deciding factor in when that chicken was killed,
Okay.
but I can say that he's eating that chicken.
Yeah, the inference is, the fact is, well, we may not have seen him do this, but the inference we're drawing from the photo is you've got the dead chicken, you got a face full of feathers. The inference we're taking from it is, hey, this fox killed that chicken. But I mean, it kind of depends. But this is always a great picture to kind of look at because, if you were to write this report, could you actually say that the fox killed the chicken? You may not be able to. You could draw some inferences from some of the facts that that there's a dead chicken, and the fact that there's nobody else around, no other animals around, and the fact that he's got a face full of feathers. Those are all facts. The inference is that he killed the chicken. So hopefully that photo kind of makes you get that. Okay, so as we kind of push into a little bit more on grammar, and this is important because now we're going to start to tighten up what we write, meaning that I want you to start proofreading. And it's only a supplemental report, so it's not going to be really that long. So start looking at some of the things that you are writing, and an example would be if we look at nouns. And I'm not going to go through the whole English lesson on what a noun is, but we know that people, places, things, and a lot of times we tend to do things when we capitalize things that maybe we shouldn't capitalize. Almost everybody I know, whenever they write the word police officer, if they just say police officer, they capitalize it. And my question is, how come? Now, if it's Officer Farrar or Officer Dunker or Officer Liebert, then sure, that would be a capitalization. But if it's just police officer, we tend to capitalize it because we think it's important. But it's really not the name of anybody, just like suspect, witness, victim. So when we look at nouns, people, suspect, witnesses, victims, places, City Hall, Denver, America, things, gun, knives, wrench, bullets. These are all things that are kind of nouns, right? And common nouns, just remember, those are things that aren't, specific names of persons, right? Like suspect, victim, witness, weekday, park. These are all, it doesn't name the actual park. It's just a park. I located the suspect in the park. Well, you don't capitalize park unless, it's got a name to the park, right? Proper nouns are a little bit different. These are specific names of persons, places, or things, like Officer Merson or Menifee, California, or Mount San Jacinto Community College, or Commander Morrison, whatever. These are all things that we have to start, that we would capitalize. So when we start writing now, let's start paying a little bit of attention to, capitalization. What do we need to capitalize? What's not? What's just a regular noun? What's a proper noun? And then also using pronouns. These are words that substitute for a noun or a noun phrase. It takes the place or refers to a noun, like I found the gun. And I is the pronoun there. Remember, in your reports, you always want to use, you want to try to write in that first person unless it's something that happened like before. Okay, but it's always going to be I. Stay away from that bad report that you guys looked at. Okay, this officer, that doesn't, or, every once in a while I see, a student will use we. We responded to the call. Well, that, we know who we is or are, but the reader doesn't. So that's why you want to make sure that you're being a little bit more specific. Know what verbs are, and I'm sure you all do. These are words that are used to express action or a state of being. Okay, It emphasizes something about the subject of your sentence. So, examples: hit, strike, punch, bite, throw. Example could be the burglar crept by the window. Crept is that kind of expresses that action. The driver appeared to be intoxicated. Appeared is the verb that expresses action. Now, again, you may have to go into more detail, but just know, be a little bit more cognizant of what you're writing and the words that you're using. Uh, Also, note that a lot of reports cover situations like I talked about that have occurred in the past. So when that happens, you can write the reports, in the first person, but in the past tense, right? So here, and this is a kind of a good example that I've seen a few times. I entered the residence and discovered the suspect had beaten, because it's the past tense, right? Had beaten Mrs. Smith, the victim, who was unconscious. Okay, so that's a good use of it. Now, an incorrect would be, I am enter the residence and discover that the suspect beat Mrs. Smith, the victim, who is unconscious. So start watching for those little details. Okay, because now again, as we start to move in, we've written like 4 reports now. So now we're going to focus on those headings. We're going to start focusing a little bit on grammar and really paying attention to what you're writing. Remember, when you write your crime report, they refer to it as a case report here. You use a form of technical writing, and remember that that your writing tells a story. Okay, so we want to make sure that we're telling that whole story. Remember that when you write a sentence, write a whole sentence. But not these big long run-on sentences. Remember, a sentence has 2 parts, a subject and a predicate. And again, this isn't an English lesson, but just kind of rehashing a couple of things, right? So that way we can start to understand the importance of what we're writing and what it means. So a couple of examples. The crime occurred. Crime is the subject. Occurred would be the predicate, but just some examples. So another couple examples. The upset victim of the robbery cried uncontrollably during testimony. Now that's kind of a long, kind of flowery sentence. You could probably make that a little bit better, but just to give you some examples of how those sentences are kind of made up. Okay, punctuation. This is really important for law enforcement professionals in report writing because it can demonstrate a lot of different personalities, moods, or even emotions that took place. So you want to capture the moment. Be careful to overuse exclamation points. Okay, there's nothing wrong with using them, but you don't want to use too many. And when we start to look at our reports, pay attention to the use of commas or periods. So you want to make sure that you end your sentence properly, right? Question marks, direct quotations and questions, and then finally exclamation points. So a couple of examples. Periods are typically at the end of a sentence, right? Or statements, or when you abbreviate, and we don't like to abbreviate unless it's like doctor or something like that, or AM or PM. So, some examples could be, again, doctor, Mr., PhD, AM, PM. These are just a couple examples, and then putting a period at the end of your sentence. And it's not the end of the world if you forget some of these little things, but remember, when people read this, you want to try to catch as many little things as you can, right? Question marks kind of end, an interrogative sentence or a question. So, do you understand your rights? You could put a question mark there. Did you kill your neighbor? You could put a question mark there. So these would be more things for interviews, but you still want to make sure that you're using question marks properly, and periods properly in your sentences. Direct quotes. When using direct quotes, the question mark will go inside the quotation marks. When the quotation, asks the question mark goes in the outside of the quotation marks when the entire sentence poses a question. So a lot of people get this wrong, and even I do every once in a while. So some examples. And what I mean inside or outside the quotes, and maybe you never even thought about this. And again, it's not going to kill your report. It's just me kind of reminding you. So an example here for inside. So the question mark, is it inside the quote or outside? So I asked her, quote, did you slap your husband? It's on the inside. And then on the outside would be who yelled, quote, get off my property. So you could go back and you could actually look again. When using direct quotes, the question mark will go on the inside. It goes on the outside when the of the quote when the entire sentence poses the question. So just little things to kind of keep examples of. Exclamation points. These will end sentences that show emotion, excitement, or a sense of urgency. Okay. So, call 911 now. I heard gunshots and then I just ran. These are just a couple of examples. But so hopefully this makes sense. And then finally, commas. This is tough because everybody kind of uses their own rule when it comes to commas. So there really are two kinds of writers in this world, those that use too many and those that don't use enough. So finding a happy medium is kind of important. So a lot of times commas are used to clarify a relationship within a sentence, and it can be used for, listing things, coordinating different, adjectives with an introductory phrase or with conjunction. So here's a couple of examples. So the burglar stole a DVD player, comma, television, comma, clock, radio, comma, and my watch. Another one, Mr. Jones stated he had a slow, comma, painful recovery. So just a little bit of insight for us to kind of be aware of as we write more technical narratives that are coming up. And then finally, some commonly misused words. And this is why you really need to kind of check your work, proofread your paper after you've written it to make sure that it flows right. And you can catch a lot of the little things, whether you didn't put a period at the end of a sentence, whether you should have capitalized something. But if you read it out loud to yourself, a lot of times you can catch things and start looking at the words that you use. So here are some common ones in reports. So advise and advice. Okay. Advice is a noun, advise is a verb. All right. So, here examples could be Mr. Lawrence followed Officer Smith's advice and moved his car. And then at the bottom, Officer Smith advised Mr. Jones of his Miranda rights. So these sometimes get mixed up. So we want to make sure that we know which one is correct. The same with effect and effect. Okay. A lot of officers mess these up a lot. Okay. Affect, and that I kind of stress the A and the E because it helps me remember. But affect is a verb that means to influence, and effect is a noun which means the result. Okay. So examples, how did the burglary affect your family, right? Okay. And then what is the effect of this speeding ticket, right? The result regarding, how it's going to impact your driver's license. So two words that get mixed up a lot that need to be, correct when you write your report. Same with among and between. Among relates to many things, between relates to two things. So, example, Mr. Johnson was among the victims, meaning one of them. He was one of them. Or the unidentified robbery suspect stood between Mr. Roberts and Mrs. Davis. So you can see the difference, right? So among and between. Again, a lot of people kind of mess those up. The same kind of thing happens with the words as and like. So as is kind of a subordinating conjunction and introduces a subordinate clause, and like is a preposition, and it's followed by the object. So examples here would be Mrs. Smith stated that Carl Travis acted as if he were intoxicated, or Mrs. Smith stated that the robbery suspect looked like a white male. So you can see the difference, okay? But these are, again, common words that people mess up all the time. Bad and badly, the same thing. Bad is an adjective, and badly is an adverb. And then I have a couple of examples there. Here's a big one that people tend to mess up as well. Okay, illicit and illicit. All right, illicit, again, I kind of overemphasize to help me remember, is a verb that means to draw out. Illicit is something that's illegal. So examples: during my investigation, I attempted to elicit a statement from Mrs. Smith, meaning I wanted to draw that statement out. Or the other example, the confession was determined to be illicitly obtained, meaning illegally obtained. So again, words. Same with good and well. Okay, and this happens all the time. Good is generally an adjective. Well is generally an adverb. So, Mrs. Smith stated that he thought it was not a good idea to kill his wife, but it was not planned well. So good and well. Another one that gets confused a lot would be hang, hanged, hanging, and hung. And I'm not going to go through all these, and you can kind of go back and take a look at these, but you can see that there's going to be a difference between all of these. So again, just kind of enlightening you on different common words that we tend to kind of mess up. Okay, and I have some examples. A couple more: imply and infer. Imply means to suggest, and infer means to draw a conclusion. So examples: Mr. Jones stated that he did not mean to imply that his friend was a criminal, meaning suggest. Or the other example: based on the statements of all parties, it was inferred, okay, that Mr. Jones was the person who first used physical violence, meaning that you kind of drew that conclusion based on what you were reading. Lay and lie, same thing. A lot of people kind of mess these up. Lay means to put something down. Lie means to incline, like lie down. Okay. Principal or principal and principal. I mean, they kind of interesting. The principal, if you will, refers to the head of a school, and principle is a truth or a belief. Prove, proved, and proven. I won't go through all of these as well, but I just wanted you to kind of, again, know some words that are commonly misused when we write our police reports. And then the biggest one that really kind of gets misused would be there, and there, right? So the first there, the EIR, is possessive. The middle one, the there, the ERE, is used to indicate a place. And then the there with the contraction is, the word they are. So, again, just by examples, hopefully it'll help you when you write. The suspects parked their car, right? That's the possessive one. Mr. Smith, the suspect stated he parked his car over there, right? Place, direction, or they're going, meaning they are going. All right, and then a lot of you know the different twos, so I'm not going to go through that, but these are also things that kind of get mixed up by a lot of students as well. And the same with who, whom, that, and which. But just start thinking of these as you're writing. And I know, again, this isn't meant to be like the English lesson, but these are real common words that I see a lot of times that are in reports that are used basically improperly or in the wrong context. So that's kind of why I'm going over a lot of these different ones. Your and your. Your is the possessive, and then the RE is the contraction. Okay, so some tips as we finish up. Again, I told you it was kind of a short lecture. Ensure that your grammar, spelling, and use of these specific words in the report are correct to the best you can, which is why I really want you to start proofreading, okay? Ensure that every sentence has a noun and a verb. So make sure you have a complete sentence, okay? ensure that each sentence is able to kind of stand on its own. Make sure you identify the main people in your sentence, who or what your sentence is going to be. And again, remember that if you use someone's, like if you're going to say victim John Smith, after that you can just refer to that person as either Smith or victim Smith, either one. Okay, but you don't need to write out their whole entire name every single time after the first time you identified them. Okay, when you're kind of formulating your sentences, okay, kind of build your sentence, right? Place the subject, then the noun, the person you're writing about, follow it with a verb, etc. And these are all kind of things I'm pretty sure you know. Okay, so I'm gonna pop back out of sharing here. So I know that was a little bit more kind of on the English side than we tend to usually go in, but because we are starting to we're going to be getting into some more technical reports. We've got one other supplemental, and then we're going to start kind of doing some things that are a little more technical, but we're going to ease into it, so don't panic. But I wanted to make sure that we now start looking at some of the little details. All right, which means, again, proofreading your sentences, look at your grammar, look at your spelling, read your report out loud to make sure that it kind of makes sense. Okay, and then go ahead and submit it. So with that being said, any questions on tonight's information?
I think I'm good.
Anybody else? I'll have office hours tomorrow, so if you're really not sure or whatever, you can always you can pop in there or what have you. I'll have this video posted probably later on tonight, so you can go back through and review. And then remember, in last week's writing assignment, I attached that document that I showed you with some headings on it. So if again, we're through. We've written 4 reports now, and I keep kind of grinding this in there. Use the headings. Use the headings. So if you're writing a report that does not have headings, then you're not following what we want you to do. I want you to kind of stay with the headings to really help not just you, but to also help the reader. Okay, and use that supplemental that I kind of attached there as a guideline. All right, and then we'll talk a little bit more about it next week. But if nobody has anything else, I'm not going to make you suffer and hang here any longer than you have to, because I know you have other work to do, including the rest of this week's work. So with that being said, that's going to wrap it up if you guys don't have any other questions.